Allah's name. He is the merciful benefactor, the merciful redeemer. Praise be to Allah, guardian evolver of all systems of knowledge. This is not a small statement. This is a very powerful statement. A recognition of praise and the sensitivity to have gratitude. Allah says in one place in the Quran that for those who are grateful, he'll give them more. So we begin with a spirit of gratitude. This sets the foundation. The spirit of gratitude is an acknowledgement. You have to position yourself in a certain way to begin with gratitude. You have to have the right spirit to begin with gratitude. You have to have a level of humility. Our gratitude is because of a recognition that nothing that we have is possible for us without Allah's providing it. And so nothing that we are able to accomplish is a possibility for us, except that Allah allowed for it to happen. Allah made way for, Allah authorized the possibility for it to happen. And so we begin always with recognition and with gratitude. We praise Allah. We seek assistance from him. We ask him for forgiveness. We put our faith in him, he that is almighty and perfect. This is all in the traditional opening of the presentation, the formal presentation of the Imam. We ask Allah for forgiveness. Why do we make a point to ask Allah for forgiveness? We make a point to ask Allah for forgiveness. This is inherent in our disposition as Muslims, as believers. This is an inherent quality that we have, something that's inseparable from our nature as believers. We approach Allah with a spirit of gratitude, and we move out. And we go into the world to build upon that spirit and build upon the drive that we have to pursue our excellence. But we're going to mess up. Somewhere along the way, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to do things in our ignorance and in our naivety that are not the best are not the best outcomes. We're going to bring about things that may not be the best results. But by way of those mistakes, or by way of those explorations, Allah provides us experience that supports the guidance. Allah provides us experiences that, excuse me, build up our human character and that strengthen the dignity that we're working to preserve and protect and reinforce. And so we ask Allah for forgiveness. The posture to be turning to Allah for forgiveness. I don't know what just happened. Oh. Okay, it just kicked me out. But I'm back. Thank you to Allah. Okay. So we ask Allah for forgiveness, and we have this spirit and a demeanor to turn to Allah constantly, turning back for forgiveness. We're not a people who walk through life burdened down with a whole lot of guilt. We're not a people who walk through life tiptoeing because of like a guilt complex or inferiority complex, or the a sense that somebody else has an entitlement that is greater in its measure than our entitlement. We're entitled to the same dignity that everybody else has. We're entitled to the same birthright that everybody else has. And so we turn to Allah in forgiveness, in recognition that we may have messed up, we may have made little mistakes or big mistakes, but that doesn't take us out of the original nature that qualifies us for dignity. And as long as we turn to Allah for forgiveness, Allah will forgive everything. Allah will wipe your whole slate clean, as long as you turn back to Him, and then continue supporting you and give you more support and more guidance. So we ask Allah for forgiveness. We put our faith in Him. We recognize that He is without flaws, and He is the one that is perfect. We seek refuge with Allah from any bad actions on our part. We seek refuge with Allah from the influences of a corrupt culture. Whoever Allah guides, there's none who can lead them astray. And whoever Allah leaves wandering, there's none who can direct them to the correct path. We witness that there's no God except the one God. He's one alone, having no partners in the rule of the heavens and the earth. And we witness that Muhammad, to whom the Quran was revealed, is his slave servant and messenger. And we pray that the prayers and the peace be upon him, his family, the companions, the righteous, all, and what follows. This class is based on the special dua of Imam W.D. Muhammad, the special dua that houses his sensitivities that were in focus when he turned his attention to Allah in private communication. And to look at what produced Imam W.D. Muhammad. Imam W.D. Muhammad, in his innocence, was produced by the condition of the African-American people coming out of slavery. And right in the middle of all of that, you have somebody who is innocent and is guarding and preserving his innocence, has people around him, insulating his experience in the world, protecting him, guarding him from outside influences, and helping him, supporting him in the preservation of his innocence, and supporting him in an environment that protects him in his perception of the direction that we need to go forward. And doesn't protect him to the degree that he can't see what's going on, but protects him to the degree that those things are not strong enough to be able to pull him away from the direction that he was moving in. And so in his innocence, I have a speech here, the transcription of a speech is called Return to Innocence, the Transitioning of the Nation of Islam. This is a speech that Imam W.D. Muhammad gave at the Wisdom University Conference in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And so, you know, there's people here like big dignitaries, John Kennedy, Junior. There's a number of people there, but he's presenting to these people at this conference, and he's telling them the story of his life. He's telling them about his childhood coming up under the influence of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and what produced his thinking. He went into what caused him to question the presentation of God as it was given in the Nation of Islam teaching, and he went into his experience being locked up, being put in prison, and Imam Abdul Malik addressed this. It was in prison where Imam W.D. Muhammad solidified his direction in a way that was separate from what his father was doing. Separate from one way of looking at it. It was never disconnected, but it was distinguished. It was distinguished. And what allowed for him to have a distinguished pathway to walk was the same thing that supported Muhammad the Prophet. When Muhammad the Prophet went up in the cave, isolated himself from the people, put himself in an enclosed environment, along with his thoughts. There's a heading in here. You probably can't see it, but the heading is called "In Prison with My Own Thoughts." That's a description of the same situation that Muhammad the Prophet had when he was in the cave. We don't think of it as a prison, but he was enclosed in his own thoughts, because he was troubled by, there was something in his sensitivities that registered, that even if he couldn't explain it consciously, it registered on his sensitivities, and he separated himself from it, put himself in an environment alone with his own thoughts, in search of clarity and guidance. So this is an experience that happened with Muhammad the Prophet. This is an experience that happened with Imam W.D. Muhammad. And he made it clear that by the time he got out, when he was released, he had come to the conviction and come to the stance that he was never going to go back to teaching or presenting in his teachings the concept of God as it was given by his father and his father's teaching. And he was on parole or probation. He was on probation when he came out, and he was burdened. It was a burden on him because he knew that he had a different direction in his thinking when it comes to presenting this concept, and he had already been put out. He had already been put out before he was in prison, and when he came back, he was concerned. He had a concern that it was going to cause issues because he knew he wasn't going to go back to teaching that same concept. But that issue was relieved when his father told him, "You're on probation. You're probably going to violate your probation if you get up there in the ministry teaching. And so stay out of the ministry for a while." And so that's what he wanted anyway. And he stayed out for a while, but then as soon as he got put back in and he started teaching, he got excommunicated again. They kicked him right back out. But the whole time, he was moving upon innocent sensitivities. He was moving upon innocent sensitivities with the consciousness and the collective experience of a people that went through the troublesome situation of the peculiar institution of slavery and Jim Crow and all that's included in that experience. And here you have somebody who's wrestling with that. This is what produced Imam W.D. Muhammad. And this all fits into the context of Quranic teaching. There's a verse that I read in the Quran. I looked at the Arabic and it says something different than what's in the English. Surah 87 and verse 6 Sanukuri uka fala tansa. Sanukuri uka comes from the word para'a, to read. Sanukuri uka. This means Allah is going to read you. The translation says, by degrees we shall teach you to declare or to recite so that you will not forget. But it doesn't necessarily say that we're going to teach you to declare. It says we're going to read you. And so the guidance comes not as something separate from the human experience. The guidance comes to give meaning to the human experience. And your life gets read into the guidance. The Quran, the Quran comes alive in the context of your lived experience. Your lived experience put into perspective by the guidance coming from the Quran is the Quran reading you, Allah reading you. And this is guidance for the life. And so any people who are in touch with the guidance, and not just old tradition, but who have access to real guidance in the moment, true guidance, and not just following what their forefathers went through, but they're in touch with the guidance. Then the Quran, when they read the guidance from the Quran, Allah is reading the guidance into them. Allah is reading them in the guidance itself. So when Imam Abdul Malik talks about the story of Joseph and the parallels with our life, this is how Islam is supposed to be. When we look at any of the stories or any of the references in the Quran, we should be able to see the parallels in our life. And if you can't see how the guidance applies to your life in real time, then you should question whether or not you truly have access to the guidance, or do you just have information that has been passed down by people before you? Are you just repeating what somebody else said? Or do you actually have real guidance directing your life? And when you look at the way Imam Abdul Malik teaches, and the way all of these other people teach, it's very clear, it's abundantly clear who's in touch with the guidance. Real time. Where Imam Abdul Malik places his emphasis is where we should place our emphasis. Let me say this before I forget. Little side note. When we started this class, it originally went from 9 to 11, and we went beyond that. It was scheduled to go from 9 to 11. We went beyond that, added on a whole hour because we wanted more, and the Imam was willing to accommodate us. Now, at this point, we usually go all the way up to 12, and recently we've been going beyond. The Imam has already extended himself for us. And if you notice, if anybody caught it, last week he said, I don't want to oppress my family. So he has the spirit that he wants to stay and accommodate us. But we have to recognize what sensitivity is being presented. There's a verse in the Quran that came down, reading into the life of Muhammad the Prophet. There's a verse that came down that said, when you go in to the Prophet's house to join him for a meal, once the meal is over, you get up and leave, because the Prophet was too shy to ask of himself that you leave. The Prophet was willing to accommodate the needs of the people, and he wasn't going to ask people to leave who felt like they had the sensitivity and they needed him. So Allah had to send down a revelation to give people direction. The Prophet's uncomfortable. He's not going to tell you to leave, but you need to discipline your approach to the Prophet. And when you get done with your meal, when you get done with that experience, don't overstay your welcome. Okay, So we should have a sensitivity in our respect for our leader that we don't we don't want to overstay our welcome. And he has a sensitivity that he's going to accommodate us and he's going to address us. But if we get down to the end and it's like 12 o'clock, if you have a question, if you still have questions or concerns or input, if it's not so pressing that it's urgent and it needs to be said today or in that particular class, you should hold on to it until the next class. Okay, so this is all part of the guidance. This is all part of the guidance. This is all part of our experience in developing us and honing our sensitivities and sharpening us and moving us in the direction that we need to go to be a salvation for humanity, really. Muhammad the Prophet was a mercy to all the worlds. And where do you find the truest expression and application of the teaching of Muhammad the Prophet except with us and with this leadership that we have? And this is not a statement of hyperbole. Everybody here, you know, we recognize that this is a reality. This is a reality. The Imam has a sensitivity to address issues on a world scale. He can address issues that happen with us personally, as a group of people with a particular history and context for our expression. But he can address at the same time that he's giving us guidance, he is focusing in on the principle that addresses us, but it also anybody else outside of our particular group who's listening to us can register the focus of what he's saying and find guidance and direction for their life as well. He pays attention to, he said this one time, he pays attention to when he's deciding what he's teaching. He pays attention to what burdens the life and takes away from the life, and he pays attention to what adds on to the life and moves the life in the correct direction. And this is how he determines what he presents to us. There's a lot of issues that we have. There's a lot of issues that come up that are not the main issues. There's a lot of periphery issues. And the Imam was trained by the best. He was trained by the best, and he's in touch with the guidance. And he's innocent. And he's able to register in a way that most people can't. The proper placement of emphasis on the issues that need to be addressed. So there's a lot of people who claim an association with Imam W.D. Muhammad, but they reject Imam Abdul Malik's leadership. And they're going out here, they're tiptoeing around issues, or they're guessing. They're guessing. And people are getting caught up on periphery matters and not addressing the main things, not addressing the main matters. You get caught up on one thing that's important. Listen, there's some matters that may be a huge corruption in the life that need to be addressed. But if you focus on what the core issue is, that's not that thing. If you focus on what the core issue is and you straighten out what the core issue is, there's a lot of things that will correct themselves. There's a verse in the Quran, where Allah he instructs the women to cover themselves up. In the grammatical structure of it, it's not a direct order to them. It says the instruction is to let them cover them up. Let them cover it up. So it's not saying you cover it up. You cover yourself up. Allah is addressing them. He's saying, let them cover themselves up. And by putting it that way, it puts it on the women. It puts it on the women to embrace the sensitivity for themselves to cover themselves up how their nature determines that is correct, that is appropriate. This is a lot. There's a lot to be said. A lot to be said. Many people who claim an association with Imam Muhammad, they present ideas and they present concepts and they present them in the name of the Imam, and they misrepresent what Imam W.D. Muhammad stood for. They misrepresent what he was all about. He may have broken down a symbol, or he may have explained something that blew their minds, and Imam W.D. Muhammad was just making a side note. And because people were so fascinated by the side note, they missed the main point of what he was saying. And there's a lot of people who claim to be following Imam W.D. Muhammad and who claim to be on what Imam W.D. Muhammad was on, who are really lost. And in their mind, they think they have the answer, but they're not producing any results. They think they have the answer because it's something that appealed to them and it registered to them, and it's really a selfish interest to take your fascination and your interest and to get drunk off that to the point where you can't see clearly beyond your personal interest or your personal fascination to determine what is more important for the life of the people. And the guidance wasn't sent down just so you can, well, Imam Muhammad said it before, the guidance wasn't sent down just so you can masturbate on yourself with it. That's not what it's for, even though that's how a lot of people use it. Okay. So much has to be corrected. People who claim that we have a new mind, or they support this notion of having a new mind. What is this new mind that they're talking about? If they're not clarifying it, then it may be a problem. They may be introducing something that sounds good, but is a corruption and takes the life completely off of what it's supposed to be. We're not all supposed to go in our own direction. The life that Allah created is one. Allah created nafsan wahida, one human personality, one soul, one picture for the life. He says that in the Quran. He also says that our death and our resurrection is as one soul. So our whole life, the picture, our origin and our destiny is to be seen in the context of one soul, one human personality, one picture of a human dignity, one picture of human expression. In that expression, you have many different expressions, just like the body has many different parts. The hand has a different role than the mouth. The mouth has a different role from the toe. The toe has a different role from the shoulders. But all of these pieces come together into one picture and support the expression of one picture. We're not supposed to all have our own minds. Not like that. The mind that we're supposed to have is the mind of the universal human picture. The original pattern that Allah created for human innocence. Before it manifested in physical form as humans walking and breathing and touching and moving. Allah created the picture of what the human life is supposed to be. The mind that we're supposed to have is the mind that's in touch with that. The mind that we're supposed to have is a mind that's formed by the sensitivities of human innocence. And if people have lost their innocence and embraced different forms of corruption that move the life out of the picture that Allah wanted it to have, then your mind is not the mind that we're supposed to have. If your mind is so limited in its scope that you can't take the guidance and see how it applies for all people as a mercy for all people, but you're not willing to follow leadership because you're so captivated in yourself, and you feel so entitled in and of yourself that even though you can't, you don't even have the broadness of mind to be able to perceive what is best for all people, but you're going to be so arrogant that you refuse to follow leadership. You deserve the punishment. Nothing in the religion separates us from each other. Everything in the religion points to unity. Everything in the religion points to oneness. How is everything in the religion going to point to oneness, and we take on this attitude that we all are our own leaders, and we all are to pursue our own direction? This is a corruption of the life. Even when we stand, what distinguishes us visually more than anything else as a community of faith is our prayers. And in our prayer, everybody stands up behind the imam, and we follow the imam. When he moves, we move. When he bends down, we bend down. When he stands up, we stand up. When he prostrates to the floor, we prostrate to the floor. We don't move with our own mind in that way. There's space for us to have our own thinking and to embrace our own experience and to bring ourselves to the direction. But we should do it in a way that we have we're picking up the discipline to conform to the oneness and to conform to the mind that Allah wants us to be aligned with. In the prayers, you know, everybody says Al-Fatiha. And when the prayers are silent, after Al-Fatiha is over, you can't hear what surah the imam is reciting. You recite whichever surah you feel comfortable reciting. You might be reciting Surah Al-Asr because that's all you know, and the person next to you might be reciting a passage from Surah Baqarah, the longest surah in the Quran. So there's space for us to have our own thinking, but our own thinking is supposed to all be in the same alignment and pursuing the same interests, moving towards the same destiny. So this nonsense about having a new mind, in some respects, the way some people present it is a total corruption. But if it's presented correctly, then it's correct. The best mind among us is going to bear fruit. And when you look at what is produced by the different minds and the different expressions of people, you could tell people by the fruit that they bear. And when you have a community of people who say that we follow Imam W.D. Muhammad, but then they reject the one who Imam W.D. Muhammad said did more to present the correct image of Imam W.D. Muhammad and Islam to the public of the United States and the world than anybody else. How can you say you follow Imam W.D. Muhammad and then reject the man who he pointed us to? This is a corruption in life, and people still claim that they're supporters and followers of Imam W.D. Muhammad, and they're still pursuing their own interests. And when they get together to have their conferences, they don't even trust each other enough to put one person up as the focus to deliver the message that everybody trust themselves to get behind. They put 1,000 people on. They put 1,000 people on, have everybody presenting and, you know, stroking their own egos and whatever else. There's a reference in the Quran. There's a reference in the Quran to the life of the dunya. So, there's a lot of people that say the dunya is bad, the dunya is bad, the dunya is bad. There's nothing about the dunya that's bad. When Allah frames something to do with the dunya, the material world in the Quran is something that's bad, he says it as the life of the dunya. Hayat the dunya. It's not dunya by itself. It's not the material world by itself. It's the life of the dunya. I looked up the word dunya. It comes from a word that suggests what's right in front of you, what's right within your reach, what's right within your grasp. So it's not when you embrace the life of what's right in front of you. Essentially, you're living for the present. You're living for the moment. This is the problem. This is the issue. This is what Allah says the problem is. You're living for the moment. There's people in this world who are planning for their community and for their organization, for their associations and communities. They're planning for decades in advance. And they'll steamroll anybody who gets in their way. Their interest is not everybody else. There's people who are making plans for themselves and for their posterity in the world. And they don't have the interest, they don't have the universal interest to be a mercy for all people. Their concern is themselves and their children and grandchildren, their posterity. And here you have another people who are living for the moment, not making plans that that are protecting our future. Allah says in the Quran that the home for the believers is Dar al-Akhirah, the home of the hereafter, the home of the destiny. Hereafter is probably not the best word. Akhirah is that which comes later, that which comes after. If you say ukhra, that means another. Dar al-Akhirah, the home that's coming next, the home that's coming after, or the experience that's coming after. Allah mentions the awwaleen and the akhirin, the awwaleen, the people that came before you, the akhirin, the people that are coming after you. And so it's not just some mystical concept of the hereafter that we have no ties to in this world. The Muslim, the believer, is not one who lives for the moment. Is not one who just looks at what's right in front of you, what your interest is in the moment, what makes you feel good in the moment, what bolsters you up to give you some sort of whatever, some sort of platform or something that edifies your ego, something that feeds your ego and boosts you up to make you feel good in the moment, without having consideration for future planning for the life. Muhammad the Prophet, praise and peace be upon him, said that we are to live in this life. We're to live as though we're going to live forever, and we're also to live as though this is our last day. So there's a balance in that. There's a balance in that. You can't just live like this is your last day. If you just live for the moment, you live like this is your last day, okay, you're not going to consider the things that are important to keep the life going forward. There has to be a balance. And all of this is registered properly with the correct mind. And so when we talk about a new mind in the context of the language of Imam W.D. Muhammad, it's not a new mind that just emerged out of nowhere and separates us for the sake of separating us. The new mind is such that it is the same mind that Allah created us to have, but it's a mind that was lost because of the influence, the corrupt influences of different cultures. And Allah is reading us into the guidance with the leadership that we have. And we need to make it a point to never separate ourselves from this leadership, because this leadership, the direction of this leadership, the expression of this leadership is our salvation as a people, but it's also the expression in 2023, in the current moment, of Muhammad the Prophet as a mercy to all worlds. And so I close my comments with that, and I'm going to bring before you Imam Ibrahim.